You were 2 to 4 times more likely to suffer a serious adverse event from the COVID mRNA, we call it vaccine, but it shouldn't be called vaccine, than you were to be hospitalized with COVID. I think that it was grossly mismanaged.
In England, we must therefore go into a national lockdown.
I don't think there were any excuses. The World Health Organization had said that in such a situation, lockdowns are not the right step forward. So why did they change their view?
Aseem Malhotra is a leading British cardiologist who is currently making waves after claiming the COVID vaccine may have caused cancer in King Charles at the recent Reform Conference. His comments have ignited fierce debate across the globe, with supporters hailing him as a truth teller and critics calling his claims dangerous and unfounded. Do you feel that what you're saying is creating mass hysteria and that actually it's better to wait a bit longer to really get more evidence?
The evidence is overwhelming. I have done this several times and have changed and helped change health policy as being the guy, as a whistleblower. I was a lead campaigner in this country to raise harms of excess sugar.
How do we get out of the mess we're in? The future of longevity is being shaped in Geneva this October. The Global Longevity Summit is an intimate gathering at the Genolia Innovation Hub, running from October the 28th to the 30th, with pioneers like Aubrey de Grey, Matt Kaberlein, and Amy Killen. I am grateful to be joining as an advisor. And if you would like to be there too, you can get 10% off tickets with the code BEYONDTOMORROW. Just check the description for the link. I'll see you there. Aseem, what a week. What a week for you. If there was one thing you were hoping our listeners will get from this conversation, what do you hope it will be?
Well, actually, just listening to every single part of the conversation and hoping they will learn something new. You know, when I go into, whether it's listening to a podcast or a conversation with somebody, at the end of it, I hope that I'm going to learn something from it new. And likewise, the people that I'm speaking to, I'm hoping they will learn something new too. So I think that's the whole purpose of dialogue, you know, that we advance ourselves mentally and with our knowledge. Ultimately for the purpose of, as my dad said, the ultimate purpose of knowledge is to reduce human suffering. So that's basically, you know, that's at the forefront of my consciousness with every conversation I have and everything I try to learn.
You've been called a quack doctor, a bunch of other controversial remarks in the past week. For the listeners that don't know, you've made some claims about the COVID vaccine and why the royal family, for example, might have gotten cancer and a bunch of other things as well, which we'll go deep into. One of the statements was, it is highly likely that not a single person should have been injected with this COVID vaccine. Why is that?
So I'm also somebody who has a background expertise, as well as being a consultant cardiologist, in evidence-based medicine, which means I have a skill in being able to deciphering good quality evidence from bad quality evidence, and also conflicts of interest as well that taint the research information that is, you know, that doctors use to make clinical decisions. So to answer your question very precisely, without boring people with lots and lots of data, in evidence-based medicine, when you look at reliability of studies, the highest quality level of evidence is something called the randomized control trial. These are the trials, the drug trials, the COVID vaccine trials that were done that led to the initially approval by the regulator of the COVID mRNA vaccines, the coercion and mandates. Those trials were reanalyzed by independent scientists. And what I mean by that is, what a lot of people don't know and doctors aren't fully aware is that most of the information doctors use from drug trials is essentially corrupted by commercial influence to ultimately exaggerate the safety and benefits of the product. So I have that knowledge and background. I go in with that default and then try and understand what is the greater truth. A number of independent scientists who have a lot of repute and expertise, who are not novices in this area, one of them being the associate editor of the BMJ, Peter Doshi, who probably is up there with some of the top scientists in the world over many, many years, having expertise in uncovering misdemeanors of the drug industry when it comes to corrupting medical research. He's one of the co-authors. When they reanalyzed this data and they published this in the journal Vaccine, it wasn't a blog, it wasn't, it was peer-reviewed, published in journal Vaccine, in the summer of 2022, they found, Julian, at the very beginning, the reanalysis, essentially, you were 2 to 4 times more likely to suffer a serious adverse event from the COVID mRNA, we call it vaccine, but it shouldn't have been called vaccine, we'll go into that, than you were to be hospitalized with COVID. And that rate of serious harm in the short term, 2 months, is just short term, I'm not talking about longer term harms yet, so it's going to be lower than the overall harm rate, was 1 in 800. So when you look at that, and I don't just take that data alone, but when you just look at that, if you just had one study to rely on, if that initial analysis that was done, had been independently verified from the beginning, we likely would not injected it into a single human being in the first place. And I've taken that stance, and I'm sticking to that stance unless evidence emerges to the contrary. Nothing has come about to contradict that information other than what in essence is propaganda driven by the drug industry, who use medical research for the purposes of marketing their drugs. So a lot of the research is basically marketing in disguise. And then that gets amplified by the media, and that shapes a narrative and a mindset.
By the way, can I just clarify, the mRNA vaccine, was that the AstraZeneca, the Johnson Johnson, was it all?
This was Pfizer and Moderna.
Okay.
Yeah. Having said that, though, the AstraZeneca jab was, essentially banned and pulled from the market. Should have been pulled earlier, because one of the ways that we collect data on new drugs and the potential harms, or a signal for a harm, even if it's rare, is something called pharmacovigilance data. So that is what people, the public and doctors, report back when a drug is taken, if there's a side effect, right? Which may not have become apparent in the original trials when they were approved. And for AstraZeneca, after something like, I think it was just over 9.2 million doses, if I'm not wrong. And I was shocked when I saw this data. I was like, this is extraordinary. Why is this not publicized massively? The reports from the yellow card scheme, which is a side effect, doesn't necessarily mean serious, but enough, more than mild. Think about it. We take medications, we get side effects sometimes. How often do you actually go and fill a form and send it off, to the regulator to say that I suffered a side effect? And it's not an easy process. You have to go. It's a quite a rigorous process. So you've got to feel really, really sick to even do that kind of reporting. There were 800,000 yellow card reports after 9.2 million doses. That is absolutely extraordinary. For the Pfizer jab, it was something like 500,000 reported side effects. And within that 500,000, you're going to get a proportion that are serious. Some estimates have suggested about 20% of those are serious. I'm going to give you a bit of mathematics here, but it's important to give you an estimate of the issue. And there's lots of other data, but just on this alone. So let's say, for argument's sake, that there were 100,000 serious adverse events in England just from Pfizer and Moderna that were reported, okay? And some of them aren't going to be accurate. They're going to be people that had something else going on and thought it was the vaccine, right, when it was. But most of those are most likely to be, vaccine related. Let's say that, for argument's sake, it's 70%. So now we're down to 70,000 serious adverse events, okay, which is quite a lot. But this is the key. The regulator themselves, they, prior to the pandemic, actually have already done studies over many, many years estimating what does that reflect of the true adverse events, because most people don't report the serious adverse events, okay? It's usually a tenfold underestimate. So if it's 70,000, let's just say for argument's sake, okay? And this is just short-term harms, really. If it's 70,000, times that by 10, you're talking about 700,000 people with a serious adverse event from the COVID vaccine alone in Britain.
Okay.
So this is just one bit. I mean, I've studied this for months, but I'm just giving you an example of what kind of information we're having to deal with here.
Yeah. Because hindsight is a wonderful thing, but going back to COVID itself and being stuck in lockdown and the deaths around COVID was one thing, but the other side of it was a country locked down. The effects of, because now we can look at the effects of the COVID vaccine, but I think the greater effect was the fact that we were all housed in and not being social, and I think about a younger generation that will be affected by the lockdowns forever. Do you think weighing everything, weighing the fact that we didn't have the hindsight to realize the effects, that the way in which pharma governments reacted was appropriate? Or do you think in hindsight, actually, it should have never? Because it's not just the deaths from COVID that we're looking at. We're looking at the economic effects. We're looking at the social effects, etc.
I think that it was grossly mismanaged. I don't think there were any excuses, to be perfectly honest with you, because even at the end of 2020, when the pandemic started early in 2020, the World Health Organization had said that in such a situation, lockdowns are not the right step forward to manage these pandemics. So why did they change their view? That is the million-dollar question. Some of it could have just been a mistake in ineptitude. Some of it could have also been that, this was an opportunity for essentially exerting a control over the population to introduce other measures, because who benefited as well from the lockdowns ultimately in terms of big business? It was the tech industry, right? Big tech. There was a big transfer of wealth. And, did they also amplify that opportunity to help support lockdowns for their businesses? Who was influencing things behind the scenes? You've got Matt Hancock, who's Secretary for Health. And in leaked WhatsApp messages, which was published on the front page of the Daily Telegraph, I think they published this ultimately. When did they do this? Was it 2023? I think at the beginning of 2023, January, if I'm not wrong. And the plan for Matt Hancock in leaked WhatsApp messages between him and other politicians was, we need to frighten the pants off the public, in quotes, in order basically to make them compliant with lockdowns. That means that it was suggesting that he would exaggerate the fear of COVID and for that people would be compliant with lockdowns. And
but let's be honest, like Matt Hancock is not the sort of person that I think is smart enough to be acting as a puppet for big tech. I really want to go deep into the evidence here because on that. Let me just come back at you on that. So later on, the same journalist Isabel Oakeshott released, and this was only last year, further WhatsApp messages, which revealed that Matt Hancock actually tried to, in fact, effectively shut down concerns on the AstraZeneca vaccine that were being raised in Germany, where they'd realized there was a problem and didn't want it publicized. And basically, why did he do that? In order to protect British industry. That's essentially in the WhatsApp messages. So, this is, I don't know about the tech industry, but that is very plausible that may have been part of the reason. Because there's a fine balance between looking after people's health, of course, and not crashing the economy. I going back to this, and we are entering. It's an interesting line to tread, right? Like the balance of the severity of staying locked down versus crashing an economy, and the effects of that on people's health as well.
Yes. But the point is, I think what happened as well, that there was a suppression of real open debate from eminent scientists, and three in particular who signed something called the Great Barrington Declaration. They're all friends of mine now. Jay Bhattacharya, Martin Kulldorff, Sunetra Gupta from Oxford, and Kulldorff is from Harvard, and Jay Bhattacharya Stanford then. Was that they said this is, as you said correctly, Julian, they said, let's hold on a minute, guys. This is going to be a very, very bad idea. The knock-on effect to the economy, to get education, is going to be catastrophic and ultimately cause more harm than the virus itself in the net effect. And I think they've been proven right. And there was it wasn't either or, I think, what makes sense. And you can say with hindsight, but even then there was good enough evidence, because this is the key. The exaggeration of fear around COVID. One study in America, for example, suggested that 50% of voters, and I think it was, in this case, it was Democrat voters, thought that their risk of being essentially hospitalized with COVID was around 50% if they got COVID, when the real figure was less than 1%. So it's a massive exaggeration of the fear, which was being amplified by media and obviously governments who were not really being very honest with the public on the infection fatality rate. By the end of 2020, the infection fatality rate was calculated, and they knew this from the beginning, because I was very vocal at the beginning of the pandemic. And I looked at the average age of death that was coming out from Italy and China was about 81, 82, right? Average age of death, which was actually higher than the average age of death in many countries, Western countries, okay? So that's really crucial. And the average number of comorbidities, illnesses those people have was something like 2.7. So it was, between 2 and 3. So clearly there was evidence at the beginning that this was essentially, I'm not saying that, younger people didn't get issues or long COVID or whatever else, but essentially this was at the very beginning a devastating virus for the elderly. So what they suggested, as opposed to this lockdown, was a focused protection. Okay, we need to make sure we can institute measures to really protect the elderly and not stop the economy for the sake of this virus. And that's, I think, a grave mistake that they made.
Evidence-based.
Yeah, best available evidence. Yes.
So when you say best available evidence, I think that's the key thing. Because I really want our listeners to go away thinking Aseem is right or Aseem is wrong, because he has got as much data as possible to make me think one way or another.
Yeah, listen, there's always data that's going to change and emerge. And listen, I could be wrong, okay? But where I'm unique, and many of the people I interact with are unique, and the very, very good scientists who have expertise in different fields, is that these are people who are committed to integrity and are not influenced by the drug industry. They don't have significant financial or institutional ties to the drug industry. And this comes up to the bigger point and the bigger issue, is that we've got to a situation, Julian, over time, that big corporations have got so much power that they've infiltrated everywhere. And people are afraid to say something that goes against the interests of industry because it might affect their job, it might affect their promotion. And that is what we call a tyranny. It's not a conspiracy.
Yeah. I agree with you.
It's a tyranny. So for me, I have always I've always stuck to that line that I'm someone who is a practicing clinician who is obsessed to what makes me who I am. People can make their own mind up, okay? I'm obsessed with ethics, and I'm a slave to my conscience. What I'm doing is not easy. It comes with so much pushback, right? And but for me, the embracing the truth, it's worth the suffering and pushback that you experience for that reason. That may make me unique or different. And I have also had to change my mind many times on information as it's changed, because that's what a good scientist does. One of the issues we've got, Julian, is certainly if you look back on the whole pandemic issue, where have you seen really a mea culpa from the medical establishment, say on the COVID vaccine, where we were told, and no one can disagree with this now, if you get this vaccine, you're not going to get 95% protective against infection, you're not going to pass it on to granny. We found out very quickly that was absolutely blatantly false. We were told with an element of certainty about it. If you're a good doctor, part of what we call shared decision-making and conversation with patients is part of when you give a treatment or whatever else, you have to also explain related uncertainties. You have to have some humility, because why? Because medicine is not an exact science.
But
you see what I mean? So if they'd been humble at the beginning and said, listen, guys, we've got this deadly pandemic for the elderly, okay, in particular. It was less lethal than the flu for children. Less lethal than the flu for children. There was 1,000-fold difference in the risk of COVID from children up to the elderly, okay? And that data was there if they chose to explain to the public. When the vaccine was rolled out, they should have said, this is actually not anything like a traditional vaccine. This is absolutely correct. I'm happy people say it's more like a gene therapy, okay? It's a novel technology.
And that's mainly the AstraZeneca one.
No, the Pfizer Moderna.
And the other one was...
Yeah, it was also it wasn't exactly mRNA, but it ultimately ended up behaving like mRNA. But I'm getting to the final point, is that, and this is something I had to learn because I'm a cardiologist. I'm not someone that studies vaccines. I put vaccines into a special category. I took it. I went on Good Morning Britain to tell people it was likely safe and effective for high risk and elderly, right? I was essentially promoting it. I wouldn't get paid for it, but I was asked to do it from a patient of mine who's a famous film director called Gurinder Chadha, who asked me whether she should take it. And said, on balance, I don't see any significant harms, so probably take it and you're higher risk. So that's what happened. I went and Good Morning Britain. But what I didn't know, because this isn't my area, and it's not something that I've had to look into before, is that traditional vaccines actually go through at least 5 to 10 years of safety testings before they're properly approved. So if they said at the beginning, listen, we think this is going to work, we think this is useful, but actually there are uncertainties with this people need to know about. One, it's not like a traditional vaccine. Two, it hasn't gone through the safety testing we would like. That would have been fair. But what they did instead was, trust the science, it's safe and effective, and anyone even questioning that narrative was called a conspiracy theorist or an anti-vaxxer. Now, we've gone through all of this.
We have.
Julian, there hasn't been a mea culpa even on that, saying, guys, we were well-intentioned, but we've got this wrong. That is also essential to how doctors need to behave when they make a medical mistake, because mistakes happen, errors happen. We're taught, that when a mistake happens, when something goes wrong, even if it's not your fault, you have to acknowledge that mistake with the patient. If you have made an error, you apologize, and then you say, this is what I'm going to do to make sure no one else is harmed and stop this happening again. There's literature on this, and what this does is it increases trust, it reduces anger. The anger and decreased trust that's come up in the media recently, which has been directed at people like me who are raising safety concerns, the literature tells us, the medical literature, I'm not cherry picking here, there's a published analysis in the BMJ, says that the reason that trust has declined in other vital traditional vaccines is because of the mandates that were imposed during COVID with no, acknowledgement of the mistake. And interestingly, Julian, because this is also, I didn't even know this, I discovered this a few days ago, and I was like, wow, this is like the perfect ammunition for me to at least defend my position, which I intrinsically felt was right, is that when doctors are honest about negative information about vaccines, okay, when they're open about it, it sustains trust and it stops conspiracy theories. And that's from a behavioral science research.
So do you believe in other vaccines, by the way?
It's not about believing.
Oh, no, but do you believe in the efficacy and the overall positive nature of other vaccines?
So in essence, yes, but there's another way of looking at it. I have been someone that has been calling out problems of over-medicated society going back at least till 2012, so over 10 years. I helped launch a campaign with the British, between the British Medical Journal and the Medical Royal Colleges, who I was an ambassador for in essence. And within that, vaccines are not part of even that discussion. And one estimate suggests the third most common cause of death globally after heart disease and cancer is prescribed medications, or your doctor prescribes for you, because of side effects that are largely avoidable. When you look at vaccines, okay, no medical intervention is completely safe, right? Let's establish that. But when you compare traditional vaccines to all the other things that we dish out, they are, in my view, the safest of medical products. If that answers your question. With a serious harm rate in the published literature, which again is subject to change with time, to have to be open-minded, but the published literature in comparison gives you a serious harm rate from traditional vaccines of 1 to 2 per million. The COVID mRNA in the short term at least is 1 in 800. I mean, it's a massive difference.
I just really want to drill this point home, because you remember the new normal, the slogan, the new normal. It was a new normal. And I think every single stakeholder wanted to get to the end line of the misery that we all felt, being stuck at home with all the lockdowns and all that stuff. Do you think maybe there might have been a bit of bad acting going on, but do you think it really was to try and find an end moment where we could get out of our homes, rather than, and that was the reason why they tried to squish down this vaccine timeline into 1 year rather than 5-10 years?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think there was, it was ineptitude, but well intentioned. Yeah. In the large majority. Listen, I have been to, I can't remember how many times I've been to Parliament and given lectures and spoken to politicians across all parties and listened to them. And many of them, who I won't name, come to me for medical advice on a regular basis. So they trust me. But also when I went to them and told them about all this information, they trust me and they acknowledged it. But they then said, ooh, you don't know what to do about it, because they think it's just too big and they're just going to get attacked and smeared. So a lot of people are remaining silent. But what the point I'm making is, when I conveyed information to them, they were not aware of actually the other perspective. And when they put the other perspective together with their traditional perspective, it changed their view completely.
Yeah. So we're now at a point where we always have people that are going to be the first to say X, Y, and Z. And either they're completely and utterly wrong and they're smeared for it, or eventually they become,
or they're right and they're still smeared for it.
Well, yeah,
They're proven right later on, yeah.
Or they're right and proven later.
Yeah.
I don't know what the quote was with Steve Jobs about to be a true innovator, you've got to look like an idiot first or whatever.
Yeah.
But we're at the point now where you are saying things that, especially in this country, which I would say is more cynical and maybe not as fast moving as in the US, you're being named things that, you probably don't want to be named. And so do you feel that what you're saying is creating mass hysteria and that actually it's better to wait a bit longer to really get more evidence-based or just more evidence before? Because what I fear from your words is that there's going to be hysteria and people are going to start getting worried about the vaccine they took and the potential cause that will happen based down the road.
I am very worried myself. I've taken 2 of those Pfizer jabs. I have been diagnosed with vaccine injury. I've got an autoimmune condition. I have got markers from a very advanced test showing that I'm increased risk of cancer, despite there's no cancer in my family. We have the analysis done in the United States showing more harm than good based upon hundreds of studies. We have got links that have been from the chief medical officer within Health and Human Services, mechanistic links of it interfering with tumor suppressor genes, in other words, potentially causing cancer. We've got this explosion of cancer in young people. Julian, the evidence is overwhelming. Okay,
there's other factors. There's other factors. There's like what? Like our exposome changing our environment, more pollution in the environment, microplastic.
Yes, that's fine, but you've got to look at things over a time period, and you see that there's been a shift after specifically the vaccine. In end of 2021, before I'd fully understood and realized what was happening with the COVID vaccine, and by the way, you've got to remember something about human psychology as well. John Kenneth Galbraith, the Canadian-American economist, said, faced with the choice between changing one's mind and proving there's no reason to do so, almost everybody gets busy on the proof. Now, I know you're trying to be a good journalist and you're asking me all these questions that are probing, but some of what's coming in, it's natural human nature, the way you're asking the question, for me, and that's fine, there are a lot of people out there like that, senses to me like, oh, I can't, there must be some other, this can't be right.
No. You know what? I'm a very, very open person and I'm not going to state my opinion here.
Yeah.
I can state how I feel.
Yeah.
I feel that I also know human nature, and Peter Diamandis' quote, it's technology advances far quicker than society does.
Yeah.
And so wisdom is needed. And actually society in general, we don't want to change. What you're stating, I think it's you might be right. And I don't want to say whether you're right or not because I need to look at much more evidence. We're in a really sticky position here. And it's not just from the COVID vaccine.
Yeah.
It's from everything in our environment.
Yeah, sure.
We have fucked our environment up and we need to heal ourselves and our society. But I don't have an answer.
So Julian, the points you're making are valid. There are lots of environmental influences on our health and toxins. That's my area of expertise, by the way.
Yeah.
That's what I've studied. I'm not someone who just come out of this and just focus on the COVID vaccine. I'm somebody, so just to finish the point I was going to make, and you can look this up. End of 2021, a journalist called me from the Times newspaper and said, Dr. Malhotra, you're one of the most respected, eminent cardiologists in the country, okay? There has been an unexpected increase in hospital admissions from heart attacks, 25%, since the summer of 2021, okay? What do you think's going on? And I said, automatically, because I predicted this, I said, lockdown stress would be playing a role. And I said people's diets got worse during it. Because I look at data and look at different factors. That's my area of interest, right? Especially with heart disease. The biggest contributor to premature death is usually cardiovascular disease. The excess deaths that are happening, the main contributor is cardiovascular disease. That's why people come to me for these questions. So that's what I said to them. Big story. You can look at it with the headline, right? Leading cardiologists, poor diet, stress contributing to likely. Now this is very interesting. She said to me, and I was a bit surprised, I was a bit taken aback by it. She said, what do you about the vaccines? Do you think it could be the vaccines? And I was a bit like, and I answered it. I said, I don't think it's likely, but I thought the best thing as a good scientist, let's keep an open mind and watch this space. Something like that. I'm quoted in there. But I was very surprised that the journalist asked me that question. And then things evolved later on where we put evidence together and And the point I'm making, Julian, is you're coming at this first time, you're like, oh my God, I've not seen the data. You're asking me my opinion. And you're asking the opinion of a guy who has, and it's not blowing my own trumpet, but you need to understand, why I'm doing what I'm doing and the way I'm doing it. I have done this several times and have changed and helped change health policy as being the guy, as a whistleblower, as, I was a lead campaigner in this country to raise harms of excess sugar and the fact that sugar was harmful and help bring about the sugary drinks tax. When I did that, I was absolutely smashed at the beginning. Okay? This guy's a quack. What do you mean sugar's bad for your heart? What do you mean sugar's bad for you? No, it's important because we can go back in time and be having the same conversation about sugar right now.
Yeah, of course.
Okay? So I had to go through all of that. And when and then I also helped change the guidance on low carb diets to manage type 2 diabetes. And there was so much, pushback and smearing, and this guy's, dangerous. What do you mean saturated fat doesn't cause heart disease? Low carb diets a day. All of this. I went through this for months and months and months. So but I always do it on the background. This is for me, is that when I become an advocate for something, and the same with the COVID vaccine, it always happens after I've done my own published peer-reviewed research on it, which usually means months and months of research. And that also helps me, Julian, because when you go through, I know it's not perfect system because actually a lot of the research that's done is shoddy, but that's basically because of the funding issue, right? What makes me a bit unique, doesn't mean I'm perfect, is I'm committed to ethics and integrity, and I'm not doing this for any money, right? I lose money in this process in many ways, and you don't get paid, by the way, for doing these publications. I spent 9 months researching eating, breathing, and sleeping the issue on the COVID vaccine. I was in touch with 2 whistleblowers from Pfizer, 3 investigative journalists, immunologists, independent people who were afraid to speak, who let me put the jigsaw together to do this. And then when I published and I looked at it and I concluded, I thought, this is so bad, based upon very, very good evidence, very good, as strong as you can get, okay? I make the point that people see me as a sugar expert. And what was the research on the harms of sugar is not even close to the level and extent and quality of research that we have on the harms of the COVID vaccine. Think about that for a second. And I can say that because I've been in both places. So the question about people being ready to hear it, I get that. And I think that comes back to one of the reasons there's been a backlash. I talk about the greatest barriers to the truth, Julian, are not, and I've had to learn this in the last few years in particular, are not intellectual. They are psychological. Okay. And 2 of those barriers, which played out during the pandemic, the first one is fear. When you're in a state of fear, you're more likely to be compliant and subservient to authoritarian role. And there was a huge fear that made, I think, will influence the way that people then responded to these directives from government. And the second one is willful blindness. And that's when human beings turn a blind eye to the truth in order to feel safe, avoid conflict, reduce anxiety. Yes, he talked about anxiety and people ready to hear it, and to protect prestige and fragile egos. Some examples of this can occur that many people can relate to, can happen in personal lives where you turn a blind eye to the affair of your partner. It can happen at institutional level, right? Some really obvious examples that most people will know about. The BBC and Jimmy Savile. These are institutional willful blindness. Harvey Weinstein and Hollywood and Harvey Weinstein. The Catholic Church and child molestation. This is something that is a vulnerability in human beings. So when I'm trying to explain, when I know what's going on with the evidence, that people are not, some people can challenge, but most people either smear or ignore, I see those as intellect, these are, and I was shaped, and I'm very proud of this. My school that I went to, you might have heard me talk about this in the Reform Party conference, was called Manchester Grammar. And, that school was a brilliant school in many ways because it wasn't just about, it taught you the importance of critical thinking.
Yeah.
And their motto in Latin is sapere aude, dare to be wise. Do not let fear subdue your ability to reason.
This podcast is all about thriving to know. How can we help the world become a better, more peaceful, more conscious place? Let's build us a roadmap. Build us a roadmap of recovery, according to Aseem. How do we get out of the mess we're in?
I think it comes back to, fundamentally, we have to ask ourselves, how do we define health? And I'll define it according to the World Health Organization 1948 definition, which I love. I think it's great. A state of complete mental, physical, and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So if we expand beyond that, go into a little bit of more depth on that, Julian, my interpretation of that also means you can't optimize your mental health without optimizing your physical health, and you can't optimize your physical health without optimizing your mental health. You can't reach both to the best of, they're both intertwined. Okay. And actually, I think it comes back to first and foremost the mental side. What does it mean to be human? And what it means to be human in terms of having good mental health are some basics, which are feeling safe, secure, having sustenance, your basic needs met, having feeling you've got competence and self-esteem. These are important. These are all met, interconnectedness with each other, which obviously was massively impeded during lockdowns. And then having autonomy and authenticity. So feeling that you are free to speak your mind and also being your authentic self. What we've found right now with all this polarization going on, cancel culture, is that, and also the corporate tyranny, is people are afraid to say what they think. And that is not good for our mental health. So where am I going with this? I think we have to go back to the basics of what does it mean to be human? And that means acting from a place of virtue, basics of honesty, integrity, and having courage.
Especially in this country.
Yeah, everywhere.
Lost.
So for me, going back to square one, it starts there. And if you start from that place of integrity, which also is linked to compassion for your fellow human beings, then you're also, when new knowledge emerges, you are going to be open to changing your mind, right? Because it's about how do we reach for me on a personal level, it's all about like every day for me is how do I evolve to a higher state of being? And for me, that involves, all the other basics about, looking after my physical health, eating, real food, meditating, interconnecting with people, and actually lifelong learning. So one of the very basic messages of anyone listening to this today is a very simple recommendation would be make sure that you are learning something new every day, because actually it's good for mental health, lifelong learning as well. So every day I wake up in the morning after I've meditated, I will read something. I will spend time reading, even if it's half an hour, 20 minutes, half an hour, whether it's a research paper or a book or whatever else. But for me, because I'm obsessed with health, it comes back to how does one reach that high state of being? And then once you have that knowledge as an advocate, how do I then communicate that to others to help others as well?
From a COVID vaccine perspective as well, I love everything you just said, but let's say everything you've shared is correct. There must be an antidote to what we've taken.
Yeah. So this is a really important question you've asked, Julian. I, of course, as you know, have strong connections with the health people involved in health in the US administration. Okay. I'm, medical advisor to Maha Action. I have a relationship with Jay Bhattacharya going back before he became director of the National Institutes of Health, Bobby Kennedy, in constant communication with him. And even more importantly, all the senior scientists who are involved in looking at data, and we have conversations regularly. I won't name these people, but we talk to each other literally several times a week with what's going on. I'm giving my feedback. I'm sharing stuff with them. They're sharing stuff with me. The withdrawing the mRNA COVID vaccine from the market is almost a moot point. Okay? Because we know the people there, we know it's a mess. We know also COVID has changed and evolved. So it's very, very clear, even if there's a debate at the beginning, it's very clear now, it's very hard to argue that the benefits outweigh the harms now. Whatever happened at the beginning and whether it was effective for a certain group of people, that's fine. I'm open to that, right? But now it's very difficult to argue that it's more beneficial than harmful. So what are we learning? Unfortunately, we're learning things that aren't looking very good. I mentioned before this issue about link to cancer, which needs exploration. I'm not saying it's definitive, but there's enough of a signal to ask the question.
Okay.
And we can't ignore it. We can't just say it's definitely not there, because that would be a very, very bad idea. We need to explore it further at the very least. So what we're doing is we've got clear evidence now that's emerged that, for example, what we thought would just be something that would disappear within a few days from the arm, which is the spike protein, which is one of the most damaging parts of COVID from the vaccine itself, is still circulating the body 2 years later in people who've got ongoing symptoms. Like, what? So we need to try and figure out exactly how do we manage these people best. So how do we identify people? Like, is there a blood test or something? That's something that's going on behind the scenes. Yeah. How do we manage them best? And then how do we also, and this is my other concern, people who have no symptoms right now, and I'm not here to scare people, but I am worried about this, and I'm asking that question, not just as a doctor, but as a patient. People who have no symptoms right now, what is this doing to the body? Are they completely fine? Is there a test say, listen, you're actually safe. It's out of your body. Get on with your life. Forget about it. Great. Or is there something going on and we can act on it? And we'll need research to show, studies to do something about that. But my approach to this is, and by the way, I've managed people with long COVID who aren't vaccinated. I've managed vaccine injuries. I'm in touch with all the people in the world who are doing different protocols to try and figure out what to do. On a very basic level, I would advise people, and everyone can do it. Certainly probably people listening to a podcast are probably people who have got at least relatively decent agency and maybe resources, because there's a whole separate discussion about people who don't have agency and resources, who can afford to take supplements or whatever else. But the basics are you eating real food? Are you removing ultra-processed food? Are you getting enough sleep? What are you doing about your stress? Because these are the things that we also know are, as you said correctly, they do contribute to heart disease and cancer, etc. So this is an additive problem from the COVID vaccine, but you can mitigate from those harms, right? Likely by getting all those things optimized as best you can and making sure your vitamin D levels are optimal, for example. So this is what I'm doing with my patients, and they are, in symptom-wise, a lot of them are feeling better. So I think there is a role for this. And a lot of the people that were vulnerable to COVID, the worst parts of COVID, so 90% of the deaths from COVID globally happened in countries where more than 50% of the population were overweight or obese. A lot of the same people who are vulnerable to COVID are the same people who are vulnerable to vaccine injury. So there is hope. There is hope.
And thank you for that. And I think it's important to, whether you're right or wrong, and I'm the reason why I'm staying on the fence here is I need to see more evidence myself, and I'm not a doctor as well. So I want you to, I'm here being the journalist and showing our listeners your point of view. But I think whether you're right or wrong, it's important to at least act now on measuring, first of all, you talked about the spike proteins and all that, see how it's affecting people, and to take the right steps now rather than in 5, 10, 20 years' time when we start to see, if you're right, the effects, the real effects.
Yes. Yeah. And to be honest, Julian, I don't think it's a question about right or wrong. It's a question is how do we interact with each other to reach a greater truth? And that means not suppression and smearing. Yeah. And if you look at it, there are certain things that we can be very strong about, and I've taken a stance on this for sure. But some of the reaction, is very disturbing and worrying, where you've got certain eminent doctors, so-called eminent doctors within whatever, there is categorically no relationship here.
Yeah.
That is anyone watching that is going to think, how can you be so sure? You're not really looking into this, and it's clear that we've got to accept this as it is. It's an uncomfortable truth.
Yeah.
If I'm right on what I've said, if I am more right than wrong, let's put it that way, let's have some humility here on what I've said, then it's truly, truly catastrophic public health disaster.
Yeah.
And that is, and I understand why people don't want to hear it, but we have to unface this uncomfortable truth, because if we don't, the problem is only going to get worse.
You make a really good point around the truth and trust. The fact that trust has never been lower, and it feels like there is information that's being held from us. You don't have to be a populist to think that way. It's just true across the whole board. And so when I think people prefer to stay comfortable, and I've seen the things written about you, mate, and I think they are it's a massive exaggeration. I know.
Oh no, it's defamatory. A lot of it.
Yeah.
And it's defamatory.
So
but you got to ask yourself the question as a journalist: is that in keeping with good journalism? There's very little right to reply. There's been this sort of the Prime Minister. I tweeted this. I said that he lied about me and attacked me in Parliament on Wednesday, and the facts speak for themselves, right? He essentially implied that I'd said all vaccines cause cancer. And I'd said it, even though I was referring to the opinion of data in America and the opinion of an eminent oncologist. And basically suggested that what I am doing is dangerous extremism and promoting conspiracy theories. Now, anyone listening to this now, in the podcast, they can make their own mind up whether I sound like a dangerous extremist conspiracy theorist. I don't think I sound that way. I've no, and what's interesting is, because they are doing this, they don't realize there's other ways of information getting out. One of the reasons the trust has gone down in legacy media so much, Julian, is that there are other alternative mediums where information is getting out, where people are articulate and they sound authentic and they are giving up another perspective that is resonating with people and making them think, hold on a minute, I don't trust these guys. They're totally controlling the narrative here.
Yeah.
Right? That's the reason the trust is going down in the establishment and the mainstream legacy media. But rather than them be sort of looking inwards and saying, how do we solve this problem? They're almost doubling down on the problem and creating more polarization and division. It's not healthy. I don't want. I became well known as a public health advocate. I was elevated by The Guardian and the BBC. Right? I've written 19 op-eds for The Guardian and The Observer, 3 front-page commentaries on many topics, including corruption of medicine. Okay? I've done a BBC Newsnight report in 2012 on junk food sponsorship of the Olympics. Several stories on these issues with the BBC, working closely with them. And now, if you look up the BBC stuff, they make me out to be some sort of mad person in or whatever, some extremist. So I haven't changed. They're the ones that have changed, not me.
I'd love to go into your crystal ball. When you look at how we're going, where do you think we'll be by 2030? As a society, when it comes to health, when it comes to health outcomes?
I am somebody, I feel a moral obligation to be hopeful. So by 2030, we're 2025 now, in 5 years. I'm confident and hopeful that there will be a shift where we are starting to see a decline in chronic disease and an improvement in the management of patients who admit to hospital in terms of quality care, and a system that has changed where we remove commercial conflicts of interest when it comes to decision-making when it comes regarding health. So that's where I hope and I'm confident things will be. Because if not, we're heading towards oblivion. The alternative is not even worth thinking about. I think we're seeing more division, more hostility. Things like this happen, but I've been almost in a state of acute depression for the last few days, not because of my stuff happening to me, but witnessing this horrific murder of Charlie Kirk. And what has driven what seems like a normal, regular kid in a good family at 22 years old to murder someone so brutally. I'm feeling an essence in society of these sorts of things potentially escalating. So we need to, without sounding, to quote my friend Robert Kennedy Jr., we have to find a way to heal the divide. And that happens from conversation.
Yeah. I usually take very much a podcast approach to interviews, but given the nature of the last week, I've had to take a journalistic approach.
That's fine.
And, I know my listeners are discerning. They will listen to the facts.
No, it's good. It's important.
Yeah. But I think it's, with everything, God, it's this Overton.
Well,
also about the Overton window, though.
Yeah, of course.
Like, how do you shit? Like, the Overton window is shitting like I've never experienced in my life. Every single month, it seems that something is happening, which is making people just feel that it's normal to do X, Y, and Z. And so we're now going to that again. And so that it goes back to the point of what you're saying. It's a real shift. It's a shift of, I'm fine because I took the vaccine, to, oh, fuck, something could have happened to me. And so what I'm trying to grapple with is the world is changing faster and faster and faster. And it's like, what is the antidote here? Because we want to take people from, from the abyss. But I feel that, the powers that be, when I look at, especially in the US, I'm not going to mention names, but it feels that I don't know who is the right option now to heal, to bring people together.
We all are. We all are. We all have to play a role. Everybody, it's a ripple effect. Everyone plays a role where they decide that they're going to say what they really think, but they're going to listen to other people. Coming back to being basics of, humanity and compassion. That's how we shift it. It's not going to be one person. It has to be a collective effort. There are going to be some voices, some leaders, some people that get, more attention. But ultimately, we can't be passive. None of us can be passive. Everybody has to contribute their bit. And it will just shift itself. Revolutions have happened this way. We need a revolution. This is also in many ways a spiritual battle. Because, when you look at, I think we're living in a very corporatized society. We've corporatized the mind and human beings, which means that we have become so materialistic. We put more value on money, power, image in many ways than we do on human beings, our relationships. There's been too much of a shift down. I'm not saying that there's something inherently wrong with materialism. I think that's part of sometimes who we are as human beings, but we've become so materialistic that we've actually forgotten what it means to be human, and that's not good for our mental health. So we have to shift the dial back. I talk about this fact that we were living in this corporate tyranny. There's a great line from a book that I've read called Public Health and the Bottom Line. And it says that freedom from the external systems of oppression is directly linked to liberation from our own internal mechanisms of suffering. So we have to also go inward, right? We have to think, examine ourselves, examine our behavior, think about how we react to things. I mean, I've had quite a lot of, tragedy in the last few years. I lost both my parents in a short space of time. I'm divorced. I lost my brother when I was young. I'm taking on something which I was told by people who have been jailed for years on false terrorism charges that, brother, I won't name this person, you're taking something bigger than any of us, right? When I was talking about this big pharma mafia. And I don't care. I'm a doctor. I'm doing my duty. We need to just, stick to the truth. So I've had to dig deep as well to try and also understand when I'm getting online abuse. There's also a lot of massive support and love. I walk in the street and I get hugs from random people in the street, right? Very emotional. This is a regular occurrence for me. But I see the amount of abuse and some of the vitriol, and I have to dig deep and say, okay, this isn't about me. They're speaking from a place of fear, and they're reacting to the things I'm saying because it makes them uncomfortable. Right? So, and it's not easy, but that is the best way. It's a form of what we call nonviolent resistance. And we all have to, we can get to this better place by having a deeper understanding of the shortcomings, if you like, and the vulnerabilities of our own nature, and not letting them take over our behavior in a negative way.
What about big tech? What about social media? And I just want to finish on that because it's a beautiful note, but what I see is, I see the echo chambers.
Yes.
That the young generation especially are part of now. And I just see a platform that has made us, the reason why I think young people don't drink anymore is because they've got another vice. They are addicted to social media.
Yes.
And it gives them the dopamine hits, and it's dividing us. And what is the answer to that?
We need to curb it. We need to find a way of curbing it. We need to introduce a law. I mean, they're already talking about banning, screens for under 16-year-olds, aren't they? I mean, I grew up, I didn't have this access to screens, and we didn't have mobile phones till I left university. So I remember, I've gone through, it's not like, we're wise or whatever else, but we remember what things were like when we were growing up, and we didn't have access to these screens, but they're very, very damaging. And I think part of, again, this corporatization and the fact that there are, we are in a society where powerful industries are exploiting people for money. And one of the ways they exploit people is through these social media algorithms, which are designed to increase engagement also through polarization.
Yeah.
And it's having a very negative effect on mental health, as you know. So I think we have to start having discussions about curbing that harm. basically. And there must be, if we've developed these amazing technologies, there must be ways of adjusting them so they don't create this such a polarizing type of, there must be some better way. So we have to think about that.
Is RFK saying the same thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
100%. 100%. And I find myself as well, Julian, like when I have a mobile phone holiday or whatever else, or when I go away for abroad, I will deliberately make a plan that I'm only going to, I've got a certain 30 minutes in the day just to check messages. That's my window. And then off. And then I'm out walking on the beach or going for a swim. And you just feel more relaxed. It's just
100%.
So we know it intrinsically, but it's just, how do we break free from it? And anything like that, a product in society that's found to be addictive and harmful ultimately fulfills criteria for regulation.
Yeah.
So that's what we need to do. We need to find the right type of regulation, though.
Because I think that is the reason we can't get to our truth is the reason we can't regulate is we can't with what we have in front of us right now.
Yeah.
Aseem, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Much appreciated.
Pleasure.
If you want to know what tomorrow has in store like I do, you definitely want to listen to our recent episode where I talked to Peter Diamandis about a future where we could live forever. Thank you so much.